No one understood how the millionaire was marrying the overweight woman. The buzz in the meeting room on the 50th floor of the imposing skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan was almost palpable. High-ranking executives, dressed in impeccable suits, whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances at the head of the polished mahogany table. There, with his hands firmly resting on the gleaming surface, was Daniel Blackwell, the 32-year-old heir to the Blackwell Industries empire. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel's deep voice cut through the air, instantly silencing the room. "I thank you all for attending this emergency meeting. I know many of you have been speculating about the reason for this sudden meeting. And yes, the rumors that have been circulating around the company for the past few hours are true." He paused, his blue eyes scanning every face in the room. "I'm getting married next month." The announcement, although expected, provoked a wave of murmurs. Daniel Blackwell, one of New York's most sought-after bachelors, would finally be leaving the single life behind. But before any congratulations could be expressed, he raised his hand, silencing everyone again. "I know many of you are wondering who the lucky girl is," he continued, an enigmatic smile playing on his lips. "Well, let me introduce you." With a gesture, he indicated the door to the meeting room. All eyes turned expectantly to the entrance. And then she appeared. Juliana Martinez entered the room with hesitant steps, but with her head held high. Her long black hair framed a round, expressive face with deep brown eyes that seemed to contain universes. She was wearing an elegant red dress that hugged her generous curves, highlighting her plus-size figure. The silence that followed was deafening. The executives exchanged perplexed glances, unable to hide their surprise, and, in some cases, their obvious shock. Daniel, oblivious to the reactions, walked over to Juliana and intertwined his fingers in hers. "This is Juliana Martinez, my fiancée and future wife." The tension in the room was palpable. Victoria Hartley, the ruthless marketing director, was the first to speak up, her voice as sharp as a razor. "Daniel, darling, this is unexpected. Perhaps we should discuss this in private." Daniel's smile faded, replaced by a steely expression. "There's nothing to discuss in private, Victoria. Juliana will be my wife, and consequently, an integral part of the Blackwell family and this company." Juliana, feeling the weight of the stairs on her, squeezed Daniel's hand, seeking strength. She knew this moment would come, but nothing could have prepared her for the veiled hostility emanating from that group of strangers. "I understand that this may be surprising for some of you," Juliana finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "But I assure you that my love for Daniel is genuine, as is his for me." Juliana's words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The executives continued to stare at her with a mixture of disbelief and ill-concealed disdain. It was then that Charles Blackwell, the family patriarch and CEO of the company, entered the room. His normally impassive face betrayed a mixture of emotions: surprise, confusion, and a hint of disappointment. "Daniel," Charles' voice echoed through the room, "we need to talk, in private." Daniel took a deep breath, already anticipating the clash to come. He turned to Juliana, his eyes conveying a silent message of support. "I'll be back soon, love," he whispered, kissing her gently on the forehead before following his father out of the room. As soon as the door closed behind them, the buzz in the meeting room exploded. Juliana found herself at the center of a whirlwind of glances and whispers, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever before. Victoria, sensing the opportunity, approached Juliana with a feline smile. "So, darling, tell us, how exactly did you and Daniel meet?" The seemingly innocent question carried a tone of accusation that didn't go unnoticed by Juliana. She straightened her shoulders, determined not to be intimidated. "We met 2 years ago at a charity event," Juliana replied, her voice calm but with a hint of defiance. "I was representing the NGO I work for, and Daniel was there as a donor." Victoria arched a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "Oh, fascinating. And what NGO would that be?" "Hearts Without Measure," Juliana replied proudly. "We work with young people who suffer from eating disorders and self-esteem problems." A sarcastic smile played on Victoria's lips. "How appropriate." Meanwhile, In Charles Blackwell's office, father and son stared at each other in tense silence. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Daniel?" Charles finally exploded, his voice a mixture of anger and incredulity. Daniel, who had expected this reaction, remained calm. "I'm marrying the woman I love, Dad. I thought that was obvious." Charles let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Is that what you call it? Look at her, Daniel. She doesn't fit into our world. Do you have any idea what the press will say? What our shareholders will think?" "I don't give a damn what they'll think," Daniel retorted, his voice growing in intensity. "Juliana is intelligent, compassionate, and makes me happy. That should be enough." Charles shook his head in disbelief. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for, our family's reputation, the future of the company." "No, Dad," Daniel interrupted, his eyes sparking with determination. "I'm building my own future, a future based on love and mutual respect, not on appearances and empty social expectations." Back in the meeting room, Juliana faced increasingly hostile questioning from the executives. Questions about her past, her family, and her intentions with Daniel were thrown at her from all sides, each one more loaded with prejudice than the last. That's when Roger Thompson, the veteran financial director, decided to get straight to the point. "Ms. Martinez, let's be frank. What exactly do you see in Daniel, apart from the obvious, of course?" he gestured, clearly indicating that he was referring to the Blackwell fortune. The comment hit Juliana like a punch in the gut. She felt the blood rise to her cheeks, a mixture of shame and indignation taking over her being. For a moment, she considered running out of there, running away from the accusing stares and nasty comments. But then she remembered. She remembered all the nights Daniel had held her in his arms, whispering words of love and admiration. She remembered the laughs they shared, the deep discussions about literature and philosophy, the dreams they had built together. With this memory, Juliana found her voice and her courage. "What do I see in Daniel?" she began, her voice low but firm, making everyone in the room lean in to hear her. "I see a man who sees beyond appearances, a man who values intelligence, compassion, and authenticity above any standard of beauty imposed by society." She paused, her eyes scanning every face in the room. "I see someone who loves me not in spite of my body, but including it. Someone who makes me feel beautiful, valued, and respected every day." Her voice gained strength as she continued. "But more than that, I see a partner, someone with whom I can talk for hours, laugh until my stomach hurts, and face life's challenges side by side. And if you can't see past my looks to understand why Daniel chose me, then maybe the problem isn't with me or him. Maybe the problem is with your limited and superficial view of love and relationships." A stunned silence fell over the room. Even Victoria, who moments before had exuded confidence and disdain, seemed speechless. It was at that moment that the door opened and Daniel returned, followed by his father. The young Blackwell, sensing the tense atmosphere, quickly went to Juliana's side, wrapping his arm around her protectively. "Is everything all right in here?" he asked, his eyes sweeping the room with a mixture of concern and defiance. Juliana, feeling strengthened by Daniel's presence, replied with a soft smile, "Yes, it is, love. I was just explaining to your colleagues what makes our relationship so special." Daniel smiled back, pride evident in his gaze. Turning to the room, he declared firmly, "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope it's clear now. Juliana is the woman with whom I have chosen to share my life. She will be my wife and part of this family and this company. Anyone who has a problem with that is free to look elsewhere for opportunities." Charles Blackwell, who had remained silent since returning to the room, finally spoke up. His face, previously contorted with incredulity, now displayed a thoughtful expression. "Son," he began, his voice softer than before, I think I understand now." All eyes turned to the Blackwell patriarch, waiting for his next words. "Miss Martinez," Charles continued, addressing Juliana directly, "I apologize for the less than warm reception you received today. It is evident that there is much more to you than any of us initially assumed." He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. If my son chose you, and if you make him as happy as you seem to do, then, well, I suppose we all have a lot to learn from the two of you." The air in the room seemed to change instantly. Where once there had been hostility and mistrust, there now hung a mixture of reluctant respect and curiosity. Daniel, moved by his father's words, squeezed Juliana to him. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "It means a lot to us." As the couple exchanged looks of love and relief, the executives in the room began to move around, some approaching to offer hesitant congratulations, others still processing the turn of events. Victoria, watching the scene from afar, crossed her arms, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to this story than met the eye. And if there was one thing Victoria Hartley loved, it was a good marketing challenge. As the meeting dispersed and murmurs filled the room again, one thing was clear. The announcement of Daniel Blackwell and Juliana Martinez's wedding had shaken the foundations of Blackwell Industries. And this was just the beginning of a journey that promised to challenge preconceptions, redefine expectations, and, who knows, transform not just two lives, but an entire empire. The afternoon sun was painting the New York sky in shades of orange and pink when Daniel and Juliana finally left the Blackwell Industries building. The couple walked hand in hand down Fifth Avenue, their slow steps contrasting with the frenetic pace of the city that never sleeps. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but laden with concern. He knew that the confrontation in the meeting room had been intense, especially for Juliana. Juliana took a deep breath, letting the fresh city air fill her lungs. "I am," she replied, a small smile forming on her lips. "It was hard, but I guess it was necessary." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You were amazing in there, the way you stood up to them all. I'm so proud of you." Juliana's smile widened, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Thank you, love. But I can't help wondering, will it always be like this? Will we always have to prove that our love is true?" Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her. His hands came up to frame Juliana's face, his thumbs gently caressing her cheeks. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "What we have is real. It's strong. And no matter how many times we have to face the judgment of others, we'll do it together. Always." Juliana nodded, feeling tears forming at the corner of her eyes. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against Daniel's chest, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. It was then that the blaring sound of a horn brought them back to reality. A luxurious black Bentley had pulled up next to them, and the driver lowered his window, revealing the familiar face of Charles Blackwell. "Daniel, Juliana," Charles called out, his voice softer than it had been hours earlier in the meeting room. "Please, come in. I'd like to talk to you, in a more private setting." The couple exchanged apprehensive glances, but eventually accepted the invitation. As the car snaked through the busy streets of Manhattan, a tense silence hung in the air. "I owe you both an apology." Charles finally broke the silence, his voice charged with an emotion that Daniel had rarely witnessed in his father. "Especially you, Juliana. My initial reaction was unforgivable." Juliana, sitting between Daniel and Charles in the back seat, felt the tension in her shoulders relax a little. "Mr. Blackwell, Charles, please," the patriarch interrupted her gently. "Charles," Juliana continued, "I understand your initial concern. I know I'm not what people expect when they think of Daniel Blackwell's fiancée." Charles shook his head, a sad smile playing on his lips. "And that's exactly why I should apologize. I should have known better. I should have learned from past mistakes." Daniel frowned, puzzled. "What mistakes, Dad?" The Bentley turned a corner, entering a quieter residential street on the Upper East Side. Charles was silent for a few moments, as if gathering his courage for what he was about to say. "There's something I've never told you, Daniel," he began, his voice low. "Something about your mother and about me." The car stopped in front of an elegant brownstone house. Charles gestured for them to get out of the car, leading them into the residence. As they climbed the steps to the entrance, Daniel couldn't help but notice how his father suddenly looked older, more tired. Once inside, Charles led them into a richly decorated living room. The walls were covered with bookcases, and over the fireplace was a large portrait of a beautiful woman, Daniel's mother, who had died more than 2 decades ago. "Sit down, please," Charles indicated, heading to a bar in the corner of the room to pour himself a whiskey. He offered drinks to the couple, who politely declined. Charles took a long sip of his drink before beginning. "Daniel, you've always asked me about how I met your mother, and I've always given you vague answers. The truth is that our story isn't very different from yours and Juliana's." Daniel and Juliana exchanged surprised glances, but remained silent, waiting for Charles to continue. "Your mother, Elizabeth, she wasn't born into a wealthy family. In fact, when I met her, she was working as a waitress in a small cafe in the Bronx." Charles smiled, lost in memories. "I was expanding the family business to that area and used to have lunch there. It was love at first sight." He paused, taking another sip of whiskey. "But my father, he didn't approve. Just as I didn't approve of you and Juliana at first. He said Elizabeth was a fortune hunter, that she didn't belong in our world." Daniel felt his throat tighten. All his life, he had idealized his parents' relationship, imagining it as a high society fairy tale. Hearing the truth was both shocking and somehow comforting. "What happened then?" Juliana asked softly, her hand finding Daniel's and squeezing it gently. Charles turned to the portrait on the mantelpiece, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I chose her. I chose love above society's expectations, above my father's approval. We got married in a small ceremony, just the two of us and a few witnesses. It was the happiest day of my life." He turned to the couple, a sad smile on his lips. "But the price was high. My father disowned me, cut all ties with me. I spent the first years of our marriage building my own empire from scratch, with Elizabeth by my side every step of the way." Daniel was stunned. But Grandpa always spoke so highly of you, of Mom." Charles nodded. "Yes." Eventually he realized his mistake. "When you were born, Daniel, he came to visit us in hospital. Seeing Elizabeth holding you, seeing the family we had built, it changed everything. He took us back, and the rest is history." Silence fell over the room as everyone processed the revelation. Juliana was the first to speak. "Why are you telling us this now, Charles?" The Blackwell patriarch placed his empty glass on the coffee table and sat down in an armchair facing the couple. "Because I made the same mistake as my father. When I saw the two of you together, all I could see were the potential complications, the stares, the nasty comments from society. I completely forgot about what really matters." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting Juliana's. "You remind me of Elizabeth, you know that. Not in appearance, but in spirit. The same strength, the same determination. The way you faced that room full of sharks today was exactly as Elizabeth would have done." Silent tears streamed down Daniel's face. All his life, he had felt that there was something more to his parents' story, something that his father kept as a precious secret. Now, finally understanding the truth, he felt more connected than ever to his mother's memory. "Dad," Daniel began, his voice laced with emotion, "I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me before?" Charles sighed deeply. "Shame, perhaps. Ashamed that I initially gave in to social pressures when I met Juliana, when I should have immediately recognized what you have. It's the same thing your mother and I had." He stood up, walking over to one of the bookshelves and pulling out an old photo album. Taking a seat between Daniel and Juliana on the sofa, he opened the album, revealing photos of a young Elizabeth, smiling, radiant, and, to both of their surprise, with a body very similar to Juliana's. "You see," Charles said softly, "your mother also faced prejudice because of her body, but she never let it define her. She was strong, intelligent, and compassionate. Just like you, Juliana." Juliana felt tears run down her cheeks, touched by the comparison and by Charles' unexpected openness. "Over time," Charles continued, turning the pages of the album, "society began to see Elizabeth as I did. Not because of changes in her appearance, but because she proved her worth time and time again. She became a force in philanthropic circles, transformed the image of the company. She was loved by everyone who truly knew her. He closed the album, placing it gently on the table. And that's why I'm here now, asking not only for your forgiveness, but also for the chance to do things the right way this time. Charles turned to Juliana, taking her hands in his. Juliana, I'd like to meet you. Really get to know you. Not as my son's fiancée, but as the incredible woman you are. If you give me the chance, I promise to be the fiercest ally you could have in this family. Juliana, overcome with emotion, only managed to nod, clasping Charles, hands in response. Daniel, watching the scene, felt his heart fill with a mixture of love, pride, and gratitude. He pulled Juliana close, enveloping her in a hug, and stretched out his arm to include his father. There, in that room full of memories and promises for the future, 3 generations of the Blackwell family had come together. And although the challenges that awaited them were still many, there was now a new understanding, a new bond that would strengthen them to face any adversity the world might throw their way. When they finally separated from their embrace, Charles cleared his throat, a mischievous glint in his eyes that was very reminiscent of Daniel's. Well, I guess we have a wedding to plan, don't we? And this time, I'm going to make sure it's a celebration that New York will never forget, for all the right reasons. Daniel and Juliana smiled, their hands intertwining naturally. The road ahead would still be full of obstacles, but with Charles' unexpected blessing and the strength of their love, they were ready to face whatever fate had in store for them. As night fell over New York, the Blackwell house was full of laughter, stories, and plans for the future. And somewhere, perhaps, Elizabeth Blackwell's spirit was smiling, knowing that her legacy of true love and acceptance lived on through her son and future daughter-in-law. The sun had barely risen over New York's skyscraper skyline when Juliana awoke to the soft sound of her cell phone vibrating on the bedside table. Blinking sleepily, she reached out to pick it up, taking care not to wake Daniel, who was sleeping peacefully beside her. The phone's screen flashed with a notification, a message from her best friend, Sophia. Jules, you need to see this, now. Intrigued and a little apprehensive, Juliana opened the link Sophia had sent. It was the front page of New York Gossip, one of the city's most popular and infamous tabloids. The headline made her heart sink. Blackwell scandal, millionaire, heir engaged to plus-size employee, true love or scam? Below the sensationalist headline, there was a photo of her and Daniel leaving the Blackwell Industries building the day before, their hands intertwined but their faces tense after the turbulent meeting. Next to it was an old photo of Juliana at a charity event for Hearts Without Measure, smiling broadly for the camera. Juliana felt the air escape from her lungs. She knew that the news of her engagement would eventually become public, but she hadn't expected it to be so fast or so cruel. Jules? Daniel's sleepy voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. What's wrong? You look pale. Speechless, Juliana simply handed Daniel her cell phone. She watched as his eyes scanned the screen, his face going from confusion to anger in a matter of seconds. What the hell is that? Daniel growled, his voice shaking with indignation. How dare they? How did they get this information so quickly? Juliana shook her head, feeling suddenly exhausted, despite having just woken up. I don't know, Dan. But it was inevitable, wasn't it? I just didn't expect it to be like this. Daniel tossed his cell phone aside and pulled Juliana into a tight hug. Hey, look at me, he said softly, holding her face between his hands. That doesn't change anything. Understand? Nothing. Juliana nodded, but Daniel could see the pain in her eyes. He knew that look well. It was the same one she had when she talked about her past, about the countless times she had been judged and belittled because of her body. We'll face this together, Daniel promised, kissing her softly. I'm going to call the legal department right now. They can't go around spreading lies like this. While Daniel made the call, Juliana got up and walked over to the window of the luxurious apartment they shared. Downstairs, the city was already pulsing with its characteristic energy, oblivious to the drama unfolding so many floors above. Her cell phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Victoria Hartley from Blackwell Industries. We need to talk. It's urgent. Juliana frowned, vividly remembering Victoria's condescending tone during the meeting the day before. What could she possibly want now? Dan, Juliana called out, interrupting Daniel's heated conversation with the company lawyer. Victoria Hartley wants to see me. She says it's urgent. Daniel quickly ended the call. Victoria, what does she want? I don't know, Juliana replied, showing Daniel the message. But I think we should find out. An hour later, Juliana and Daniel were sitting in a discreet cafe on the Lower East Side, far from the prying eyes that would surely follow them in Manhattan's hottest spots. Victoria Hartley entered the establishment punctually at 8 a.m., her high heels echoing on the wooden floor. Ms. Martinez, Mr. Blackwell, she greeted, taking a seat at their table with studied grace. Thank you for agreeing to meet me on such short notice. What's going on, Victoria? Daniel got straight to the point, his voice tense. How did that story get leaked to the press? Victoria sighed, looking genuinely upset. That's exactly the reason I asked for this meeting. I'm afraid it may have been, well, my fault. Juliana and Daniel exchanged surprised glances. What do you mean, your fault? Juliana asked, unsure whether to feel betrayed or grateful for the unexpected honesty. Victoria took a tablet out of her designer handbag and placed it on the table. Last night, after the meeting, let's just say I was processing the information with one glass of wine more than I should have. I ended up making a private post on my social network, expressing my surprise at the engagement. She slid her finger across the screen, showing the couple the post in question. It was a blurry photo of Juliana in the meeting room, clearly taken without her knowledge, with a caption that read, "Looks like our darling heir has peculiar tastes. What will Daddy Blackwell say about that?" Interesting choices. Blind love. Juliana felt her stomach turn. Seeing herself reduced to an object of derision, especially by someone in a position of power like Victoria, was painfully familiar. Daniel, on the other hand, was furious. Victoria, this is completely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how unethical, not to mention potentially illegal, this is? Victoria raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. I know. Believe me, I'm more sorry than I can express. I deleted the post as soon as I realized what I'd done, but... She paused, looking genuinely ashamed. Apparently, one of my followers works for New York Gossip. They captured the image before I could remove it. Juliana closed her eyes, feeling a wave of tiredness hit her. All her life, she had fought against prejudices and judgments based on her appearance. Now, in what should be one of the happiest moments of her life, she found herself once again the target of jokes and malicious speculation. Why are you telling us this, Victoria? Juliana finally asked, opening her eyes to look at the woman in front of her. You could simply have denied any involvement. Victoria seemed surprised by the question. She hesitated for a moment before answering, her voice softer than Juliana had ever heard it. Because I made a mistake. Terribly. And because, after seeing how you stood up to all of us in the meeting room yesterday, I realized that judging you based solely on your appearance was, well, it was stupid and petty of me. She paused, seeming to gather the courage to continue. Ms. Martinez, Juliana, I spent all night thinking about my behavior, about how I perpetuated exactly the kind of prejudice that your organization fights against, and I felt ashamed. Daniel, who until then had been observing the interaction in silence, leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Victoria? Victoria straightened her shoulders, her face taking on the determined expression that had made her famous in the corporate world. I'm proposing to do things the right way, to use my marketing and PR skills not to cover it up, but to change the narrative, to show the world who Juliana really is and why she is exactly what the Blackwell family and our company need. Juliana blinked in surprise. You would do that? Victoria nodded firmly. Yes, if you allow me, of course. Consider it my way of redeeming myself and perhaps doing something genuinely good with the platform I have. Daniel looked at Juliana, making it clear that the decision was hers. Juliana studied Victoria for a long moment, looking for any sign of deceit or manipulation, but all she saw was sincere regret and fierce determination. "Okay," Juliana finally said. "We'll do it, but on one condition." "Anything," Victoria replied promptly. "I want you to come with me to one of the Hearts Without Measure events. I want you to see firsthand the work we do, the lives we touch. If we're going to change the narrative, I need to make sure you fully understand what we're fighting for." Victoria looked momentarily surprised, but soon a genuine smile spread across her face. "I'd be honored, Juliana." As the three of them began to outline a plan of action, Juliana felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, all this turmoil could be turned into something positive. An opportunity not only to defend her love for Daniel, but to bring up important questions about body acceptance and self-love. Daniel Kike, watching Juliana and Victoria dive into a lively discussion about social media strategies and awareness campaigns, couldn't help but smile. His fiancée, with her unwavering strength and compassion, was once again turning an obstacle into an opportunity for change. As the cafe around them buzzed with the morning's energy, the three conspirators wove the first threads of a story that, they hoped, could change hearts and minds. The journey would be difficult, full of challenges and criticism, but with Juliana leading the way, guided by her passion and supported by unexpected allies, there was a palpable sense that something truly extraordinary was about to happen. Outside the cafe, New York continued its frenetic pace, oblivious to the small revolution being planned at a corner table. But soon, very soon, the city, and perhaps the world, would be forced to take notice and, perhaps, rethink its preconceived notions about love, beauty, and value. The afternoon sun bathed Victoria Hartley's office on the 48th floor of the Blackwell Industries building. Juliana watched the city below, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, while Victoria typed furiously on her computer, occasionally muttering to herself. 2 weeks had passed since the news of the engagement had leaked, and things had been chaotic, to say the least. The tabloid press seemed to have declared open war on Juliana, scrutinizing every aspect of her life in search of anything that could be turned into a scandalous headline. "Okay," Victoria finally said, swiveling her chair to face Juliana. "I think we have a solid plan here. Shall we go over it one more time?" Juliana nodded, turning her attention to the marketing director. Over the past few weeks, she had discovered a side of Victoria she had never imagined existed, determined, creative, and, surprisingly, compassionate. "First," Victoria began, "we have the exclusive interview with Vanity Fair. They've agreed to do a full profile on you, Juliana. Your story, your work with Corazon Sem Medida, your relationship with Daniel. It will be our chance to show the world who you really are." Juliana took a deep breath. The idea of exposing herself so completely scared her, but she knew it was necessary. "What about the charity event?" Victoria smiled, a glint of enthusiasm in her eyes. "It's all been arranged. The Beauty Without Measure. Gala will take place in a month's time at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We already have confirmations from several celebrities and influencers. It will be the perfect opportunity to show the impact of your work and, at the same time, officially introduce you to New York high society." At that moment, the office door opened and Daniel walked in, looking tired but determined. He approached Juliana, placing a soft kiss on her forehead before turning to Victoria. "How are we doing?" Victoria gestured for him to sit down. "Well, considering the circumstances, but we have a new development." Daniel frowned. "What happened?" Victoria hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I got a call from Evelyn Blackwood." The name made Juliana straighten up in her chair. Evelyn Blackwood, the matriarch of the rival Blackwell family, was known for her sharp tongue and power of influence in New York high society. Daniel let out an exasperated sigh. "What does that viper want now?" "Surprisingly," Victoria replied, "she wants to help." The silence that followed was deafening. Juliana and Daniel exchanged incredulous glances before turning to Victoria again. "Help," Juliana repeated, certain that she had misunderstood. "Evelyn Blackwood wants to help us." Victoria nodded, looking as surprised as they were. "She told me that she's intrigued by the situation." Apparently, she sees it as an opportunity well, to shake things up a bit in New York society. Daniel let out a dry laugh. Of course, because Evelyn Blackwood has always been a great advocate of social change, he said, his tone laden with sarcasm. Actually, Victoria continued, she mentioned something interesting. She said that it's about time someone challenged the ridiculous standards we've been following for decades. Her exact words. Juliana stood up, walking over to the window again. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. On the one hand, the idea of having Evelyn Blackwood as an ally was tempting. Her support could silence many of the most vocal critics. On the other hand, trusting the woman who had been a sworn enemy of the Blackwell family for years seemed too risky. What exactly is she offering? Juliana asked, turning to face Victoria and Daniel. Victoria consulted her notes. She wants to host a dinner at her mansion, an exclusive event with the most influential families in New York. The idea is to introduce you, Juliana, as the new addition to the Blackwell family and at the same time, start a conversation about diversity and acceptance in high society circles. Daniel stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. This is crazy. She obviously has an angle here. Some plan to humiliate or sabotage us. Juliana, however, remained pensive. What if that's not the case? She said slowly, the gears of her mind turning. What if she really does see this as an opportunity for change? Jules, you don't know Evelyn like I do, Daniel argued. She's manipulative, calculating, and exactly the kind of ally we need right now, Juliana added, a new determination in her voice. She turned to Victoria. Tell her we accept, but on one condition. Victoria raised an eyebrow, puzzled. What condition? Tell Evelyn that we want the dinner to be not just about me or the Blackwells. We want it to be a celebration of diversity in all its forms. Invite people of different backgrounds, sizes, ethnicities. Make this dinner a real statement. Daniel looked at his fiancée with a mixture of admiration and concern. Jules, are you sure about this? We'd essentially be putting ourselves in the eye of the hurricane. Juliana walked over to him, taking his hands in hers. Dan, ever since our story became public, we've been on the defensive, reacting. It's time we took charge of the situation. If Evelyn Blackwood wants to make a spectacle of this, then let's make a spectacle that really matters. Victoria, who had been watching the exchange in silence, suddenly clapped her hands, a broad smile spreading across her face. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Juliana. You're a marketing genius and you didn't even know it. She turned to her computer, already typing furiously. I'll contact Evelyn immediately. If we play our cards right, this dinner could be exactly the turning point we need. While Victoria made the call, Daniel pulled Juliana into a tight hug. You're amazing. You know that, he whispered in her ear. I'm so proud of you. Juliana smiled against Daniel's chest, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She knew they were about to enter uncharted territory, challenging conventions that had been established for generations. But for the first time since the news of their engagement had leaked out, she felt truly in control. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The Blackwood Mansion became a hub of operations, with Victoria coordinating a team of press officers, bar stylists, and etiquette consultants. Charles Blackwell, initially skeptical about the plan, ended up becoming one of the biggest enthusiasts, using his contacts to ensure that the right people were present at the dinner. Juliana, for her part, divided her time between the preparations for the event and her work at Corazon Sem Medida. She insisted that the dinner at the Blackwood Mansion was not just an empty spectacle, but had a real purpose. So she worked tirelessly to ensure that representatives from various charities and diversity groups were included on the guest list. The night of the dinner came quicker than any of them expected. Juliana was standing in front of the mirror in one of the guest rooms at the Blackwood Mansion, putting the finishing touches to her makeup. She had chosen a stunning gala dress in a deep shade of sapphire blue, which hugged her curves in an elegant and confident way. A soft knock on the door made her turn around. It was Charles Blackwell, looking impeccable in his tuxedo. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Juliana nodded, smiling at her future father-in-law. Over the last few weeks, They had developed a surprisingly strong bond, with Charles often seeking Juliana's advice on matters relating to the company's philanthropy. "You look absolutely stunning," Charles said, a proud smile on his face. "Elizabeth would be so proud to see you here today." Juliana felt tears forming in the corner of her eyes. The mention of Charles and late wife always moved her to tears. "Thank you, Charles. That means a lot to me." Charles moved closer, putting his hands on Juliana's shoulders and looking at her through the reflection in the mirror. "I want you to know that, no matter what happens tonight, you are already a Blackwell in my eyes. You've brought a light to this family that I haven't seen in a long time." Juliana turned around, hugging Charles tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice laced with emotion. "For everything." When they separated, Charles cleared his throat, clearly just as emotional. "Well, I think it's time. Are you ready to face the lions?" Juliana took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "I'm ready." Together, they walked down the stairs of the mansion. In the entrance hall, Daniel was waiting, his eyes lighting up when he saw Juliana. He welcomed her with a soft kiss, whispering words of love and encouragement in her ear. The mansion doors opened, revealing a sea of camera flashes and the buzz of the crowd outside. Juliana felt Daniel squeeze her hand reassuringly. "Remember," he said softly, "no matter what happens in there, we're in this together." Juliana nodded, a confident smile forming on her lips. She knew the night ahead would be a challenge, but she also knew it was an opportunity, a chance to change narratives, challenge prejudices, and, perhaps, inspire others to embrace their own uniqueness. With one last look of determination exchanged between her, Daniel, and Charles, the three of them stepped forward, ready to face whatever the night had in store for them. The world of New York high society was about to be rocked, and Juliana was at the epicenter of the storm, ready to show everyone that love, acceptance, and diversity were the real jewels in the crown. The main hall of the Blackwood mansion glowed under the soft light of hundreds of candles. Crystals tinkled, quiet conversations filled the air, and curious eyes followed Juliana's every move as she and Daniel circulated among the guests. The dinner organized by Evelyn Blackwood was in full swing, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. Juliana took a deep breath, discreetly adjusting her sapphire blue dress. Despite her outward determination, she couldn't deny the nervousness bubbling up in her stomach. This wasn't just a dinner party, it was a statement, a small-scale revolution against decades of exclusionary New York high society standards. "You're doing wonderfully," Daniel whispered in her ear, his hand resting gently at the base of her back. His constant support was like an anchor for Juliana amidst the turbulent sea of appraising glances and barely disguised whispers. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room. Evelyn Blackwood had entered, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was a vision in a silver dress that flowed like liquid mercury, her gray hair impeccably arranged in an elegant bun. Her eyes, sharp as blades, swept the room before settling on Juliana. With measured, graceful steps, Evelyn approached the couple. "Miss Martinez," she greeted, her voice rich and melodious. "Or should I say, future Mrs. Blackwell, welcome to my humble abode." Juliana straightened her shoulders, meeting Evelyn's gaze with a confidence that surprised even herself. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's an honor to be here. I thank you very much for organizing this event." An enigmatic smile played on Evelyn's lips. "Oh, dear, the pleasure is all mine. After all, it's not every day that we get the chance to, how shall I say, shake things up a bit around here." Before Juliana could reply, Evelyn turned to the guests, raising a glass of champagne. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for a moment?" The buzz of conversation ceased, and all eyes turned to the hostess. "Tonight," Evelyn began, her voice echoing through the hall, "is not just another high society dinner. Tonight marks the beginning of a new era, an era of change, of acceptance, of celebrating diversity in all its wonderful forms." She paused dramatically, her eyes scanning the crowd. "For decades, we have clung to old-fashioned standards, to narrow notions of beauty and worth. But look around you tonight. Look at the diverse faces, the unique stories that each one brings with them. This, my dears, is the true face of modern society. Juliana felt a lump form in her throat. Evelyn's words were powerful, unexpected. She exchanged a surprised glance with Daniel, who seemed equally impressed. Evelyn continued, "And at the center of this change, we have Juliana Martinez." She made an elegant gesture in Juliana's direction. A woman who has not only defied our expectations, but who forces us to question why we had those expectations in the first place. "Juliana, darling, please join me." With her heart racing, Juliana walked towards Evelyn, aware of the stares that followed her. When she reached the Blackwood matriarch's side, Evelyn took her hand, raising it as if presenting a queen to her court. "This young lady," Evelyn proclaimed, "is not only Daniel Blackwell's future wife. She is a force of nature, a voice for the voiceless, a living reminder that true beauty comes in all sizes, shapes, and colors. Juliana, do you have anything to say to our guests?" Taken by surprise, Juliana felt a moment of panic. She hadn't prepared any speeches. She hadn't expected to be put under the spotlight like this. But then she saw Daniel in the crowd, his gaze brimming with love and trust. She saw Charles, who nodded encouragingly. And she saw the faces of the diverse guests she had insisted on including, people who, like her, had never been truly welcome in these circles before. With a deep breath, Juliana found her voice. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "When I was asked to come here tonight, I confess I was apprehensive. For a long time, spaces like this haven't been welcoming to people like me, people who don't fit the traditional molds of beauty or status." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But then I realized this is exactly why we need to be here. To show that a person's value is not determined by their size, skin color, origin, or bank account. A person's value lies in their character, their compassion, their ability to love and be loved." Juliana felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, but continued. "Each one of us here tonight has a unique story. Struggles, triumphs, moments of doubt, and moments of glory. And it is this diversity of experience that makes us rich as a society. When we embrace our differences, when we celebrate the uniqueness of each individual, that's when we truly evolve." She looked directly into the camera that she knew was broadcasting the event live to millions of viewers. "To every person watching who has ever felt inadequate, who has ever been judged on their appearance or background, you are valuable. You are worthy of love, respect, and opportunities. And together, we can create a world where everyone feels that way." A deep silence fell over the hall as Juliana finished speaking. For a terrifying moment, she feared she had gone too far, had alienated the elite that Evelyn had gathered. Then, like the distant rumble of thunder, applause broke out. It started slowly, hesitantly, but soon grew in volume and intensity. In a matter of seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding enthusiastically. Evelyn, with a gleam of approval in her eyes, raised her glass again. "To Juliana," she proclaimed, "and to a brighter, more inclusive future for us all." The toast was echoed throughout the room, and Juliana felt a wave of emotion hit her. Daniel rushed to her side, enveloping her in a tight hug. "You were amazing," he whispered, tears shining in his eyes. But the evening was far from over. As dinner went on, Juliana found herself at the center of countless conversations. Powerful executives wanted to discuss diversity initiatives in their companies. Socialites asked about her work with Corações Sem Medida. Young women approached her, thanking her for her courage and asking for advice. In a quiet corner of the room, Juliana found a moment of calm with Victoria Hartley. "You realize what you've just done, don't you?" Victoria asked, a broad smile on her face. Juliana frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Victoria laughed softly. "Darling, you've just become the new face of the body acceptance movement in high society. Social media is exploding. Your speech is already being shared thousands of times. You're officially a phenomenon." The realization of the impact of her words hit Juliana like a wave. She had always wanted to make a difference, always dreamed of changing perceptions, but never imagined it would happen on such a grand scale and so quickly. "What does this mean for us now?" Juliana asked, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in her voice. Victoria smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "It means, my dear, that our work has only just begun. We have a movement to lead, minds to change, and a world to transform. Are you ready for that?" Before Juliana could answer, Charles Blackwell joined them, his expression a mixture of pride and restrained emotion. "Juliana," he said softly, "there is someone who would very much like to meet you." He gestured towards an elegant middle-aged woman who was approaching. There was something familiar in her eyes, in the curve of her smile. "This is Eleanor Blackwell," Charles introduced, "my sister and Daniel's aunt. She's come all the way from Europe to be here tonight." Eleanor smiled warmly at Juliana, reaching out to take her hands. "My dear," she said, her voice full of emotion, "you have no idea how long I've waited to see someone like you in this family." Juliana felt tears forming in her eyes as Eleanor continued. "You remind me so much of Elizabeth, not in appearance, but in spirit, in strength. She would be so proud to see what you're doing." Eleanor's words touched Juliana deeply. Here was one more connection with the woman she had never met, but whose presence seemed to permeate every aspect of her new life. As the evening progressed, Juliana found herself at the center of a whirlwind of emotions and possibilities. The dinner that had begun as a challenge, a test to be overcome, had turned into something much bigger. It was the start of a journey, a platform for real change. But with this realization also came the weight of responsibility. Juliana knew that the eyes of the world were now on her, waiting to see what she would do next. The road ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles and critics. However, as she looked around the hall, seeing the smiles on the faces of people who might once have judged her, feeling the unwavering support of Daniel and his family, Juliana felt a certainty settle in her heart. She was ready to lead, ready to inspire, ready to be the change she had always wanted to see in the world. And with Daniel by her side and a growing network of powerful allies, she knew that nothing would be impossible. As the evening drew to a close, Juliana and Daniel said goodbye to the last of their guests. Evelyn Blackwood approached one last time, an enigmatic smile on her lips. "My dear," she said, taking Juliana's hands in hers, "you have exceeded all my expectations this evening. Always remember, the power to change the world is in your hands now. Use it wisely." With those words, Evelyn walked away, leaving Juliana and Daniel alone in the now empty Great Hall. Daniel pulled Juliana close, kissing her softly. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Juliana nodded, exhausted but elated. As they walked out of the mansion, she knew she was leaving behind the last vestige of her old life. In front of her lay a new path, bright and full of promise. The world had changed tonight, and Juliana Martinez, soon to be Juliana Blackwell, was at the center of that change, ready to embrace her destiny and make history. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Juliana and Daniel's apartment, casting a golden glow over the sleeping couple. Juliana was the first to wake up, blinking sleepily as memories of the night before flooded her mind. The dinner at the Blackwood Mansion, her impromptu speech, the unexpected reaction from New York high society. It all seemed like a distant dream now. She stretched carefully, trying not to wake Daniel, and reached for her phone on the bedside table. The screen immediately lit up with a flurry of notifications, text messages, emails, social media alerts. It felt like the whole world wanted to talk to her. With her heart racing, Juliana opened the first news link she saw. The headline made her choke. "Revolution in High Society. Juliana Martinez defies standards and wins hearts." Below was a photo of her at dinner, radiant in her sapphire blue dress, with Evelyn Blackwood by her side, both smiling for the camera. The article praised her speech, calling it a watershed moment in the fight for acceptance and diversity in New York's most exclusive circles. "Dan," she whispered, gently nudging her fiancé. "Dan, wake up." "You need to see this," Daniel grumbled, slowly opening his eyes. "What is it? Love?" Juliana showed him the phone, her eyes wide with amazement. "It's happening, Dan. It's really happening." As Daniel read the article, now fully awake, Juliana's phone started ringing. It was Victoria. "Juliana," Victoria's excited voice sounded as soon as she picked up. "Have you seen the news? It's crazy here. All the big magazines and TV shows want interviews." Oprah called personally. "Oprah, Juliana." Juliana's head was spinning. Everything was happening so fast. "Victoria, I don't know what to say. What do we do now?" Victoria laughed on the other end of the line. "Now, my dear, we ride this wave. Get ready for a busy day. I'll be there in an hour to discuss our strategy." After hanging up, Juliana turned to Daniel, a mixture of excitement and apprehension on her face. "Dan, what if I'm not ready for this? What if I disappoint all these people?" Daniel pulled her into a tight embrace, kissing the top of her head. "Ju, you were born ready for this. You've been fighting for acceptance and change all your life. Now the world is finally listening, and I'll be by your side every step of the way." Daniel's words calmed the turmoil in her chest. She took a deep breath, nodding against his chest. "Okay, let's do this." The weeks that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and events. Juliana found herself at the center of a media hurricane, jumping from interview to interview, event to event. Her story was on every magazine cover, her face on every TV show. Corações Sem Medida experienced a boom in interest and donations. Juliana took every opportunity to talk about the organization's work, turning her new platform into a megaphone for the cause that had always been so close to her heart. But it wasn't all flowers. With fame also came intense scrutiny and, inevitably, criticism. Tabloids dug up every detail of her past, looking for anything that might tarnish her image. Critics accused her of promoting obesity, while others questioned the authenticity of her relationship with Daniel. It was during a particularly difficult afternoon, after a hostile interview on a talk show, that Juliana felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. Taking refuge in her office at the Corações Sem Medida headquarters, she finally let the tears fall. A soft knock on the door quickly brought her back to her feet. "Come in," she called, wiping her eyes. To her surprise, it was Eleanor Blackwell who entered, carrying an antique box in her arms. "Eleanor," Juliana said, rising to greet Daniel's aunt. "I didn't know you were still in town." Eleanor smiled softly, placing the box on the table. "I decided to stay a little longer. I felt you might need some extra support." Juliana felt a wave of gratitude. Over the last few weeks, Eleanor had become a constant and comforting presence, offering advice and support whenever needed. "What's that?" Juliana asked, pointing to the box. Eleanor carefully opened the lid, revealing a collection of notebooks, photos, and old newspaper clippings. "This, my dear, belonged to Elizabeth. They're her diaries, her press cuttings, her memories." Juliana gasped, her hands trembling slightly as she touched one of the notebooks. "But why are you showing me this?" Eleanor sat down, indicating for Juliana to do the same. "Because I think you need to see this. Elizabeth faced many of the same challenges you're facing now. The pressure, the criticism, the doubts, it's all here." As she leafed through the diaries, Juliana found herself immersed in Elizabeth Blackwell's life. The pages were full of deep reflections, confessed fears, and, above all, an unwavering determination to make a difference. One passage in particular caught her attention. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. If the struggle is too great, the price too high. But then I remember all the women who write to me, thanking me for giving them hope, for showing them that it is possible to be loved and respected, no matter their size or origin. And I know I can't give up. I can't fail them." Juliana felt the tears return to her eyes, but this time they were tears of understanding and renewed determination. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Juliana's. Elizabeth faced her own set of challenges when she joined the Blackwell family, but she persevered, and in the process, changed not just our family, but an entire generation. You, Juliana, have the power to do the same, and more. At that moment, something changed inside Juliana. The connection she felt with Elizabeth, a woman she had never met but whose footsteps she was now following, solidified into an unshakable certainty. She was not alone on this journey. She carried with her Elizabeth's legacy and the support of a family that had learned to embrace change. "Thank you, Eleanor," Juliana said, her voice heavy with emotion. "This means more than you can imagine." Eleanor smiled, a glint of pride in her eyes. "Use it, Juliana. Use Elizabeth's strength. Use your own strength. The world is watching, and you have the chance to do something truly extraordinary." Inspired and invigorated, Juliana plunged headlong into her work in the days that followed. She expanded the reach of Corações Sem Medida, launching programs in schools and universities to promote body acceptance and self-esteem. She worked with Victoria to create a powerful media campaign, highlighting stories of real people who had overcome prejudice and found success and happiness. Her platform grew, and with it, her influence. Fashion designers sought her out for collaborations, eager to expand their lines to include a wider range of sizes and styles. Technology companies sought her input to develop apps and tools to promote a healthy body image. But perhaps the most powerful moment came during a speech Juliana gave at an international conference on health and well-being. In front of an audience of doctors, researchers, and opinion formers, she spoke not only about body acceptance, but about the need for a holistic approach to health that considers mental and emotional well-being as much as physical. "We can no longer equate thinness with health," she declared, her voice resonating through the packed auditorium. "We need to create a society that celebrates body diversity, that promotes healthy habits for everyone, regardless of size, and that recognizes that true health begins with acceptance and self-love." Her speech was met with a standing ovation, and in the days that followed, several renowned medical institutions announced initiatives to revise their approaches to weight and health, directly citing Juliana's speech as a catalyst. As her influence grew, Juliana found herself navigating increasingly complex waters, balancing her personal life with Daniel, her work on Corações Sem Medida, and her new role as a public figure and activist was a constant challenge. There were moments of doubt, sleepless nights filled with worries about whether she was doing enough, whether she was on the right track. But then she remembered Elizabeth's words in her diaries, the unwavering support of Daniel and the Blackwell family, the countless messages she received every day from people whose lives she had touched, and she found the strength to carry on. One evening, as she and Daniel walked hand in hand through Central Park, enjoying a rare moment of tranquility, Juliana stopped suddenly, turning to face her fiancé. "Dan," she said, her voice soft but determined, "I think it's time." Daniel frowned, confused. "Time for what, love?" Juliana smiled, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Time to get married, to do it our way, to show the world that true love knows no size or limits." Daniel pulled her into a tight embrace, laughing with joy. "I thought you'd never ask," he joked, before capturing her lips in a passionate kiss. As they kissed under the soft lights of the park, Juliana knew they were about to embark on a new chapter of their journey. The wedding would not only be a celebration of their love, but a declaration to the world, a chance to show that true beauty comes in all sizes, that genuine love transcends social expectations, and that a single voice, amplified by courage and determination, can indeed change the world. With a heart full of love and purpose, Juliana faced the future not with fear, but with exciting anticipation. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. Ready to love, ready to lead, ready to keep making waves and inspiring change, one heart at a time. The buzz of excitement running through New York was almost palpable. There was just one day to go until what the press was already calling the wedding of the century, the union of Juliana Martinez and Daniel Blackwell. But this was no ordinary wedding, not even by the standards of New York high society. It was an event that promised to redefine not only the concept of a modern fairy tale, but also to challenge entrenched notions of beauty, love, and acceptance. Juliana was standing in front of the window of her suite at the Plaza Hotel, watching Central Park bathed in golden evening light. Her wedding dress, a customized masterpiece created by a renowned plus-size designer, was carefully hung nearby, waiting for the big day. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to see who it was. Victoria Hartley entered, carrying a stack of papers and looking simultaneously exhausted and elated. "Well, "Future Mrs. Blackwell," she said with a smile, "I think we've finally settled all the details. This wedding will be remembered for decades." Juliana smiled, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement bubble up in her stomach. "Thank you, Victoria, for everything. I don't know how we would have done it without you." Victoria made a nonchalant gesture with her hand. "Oh, darling, it's been a pleasure. And, frankly, a challenge I loved taking on. It's not every day that we get the chance to revolutionize the wedding industry. And revolutionize they had." In the months leading up to the big day, Juliana and her team had worked tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of the wedding reflected their values of inclusion and diversity. Their chosen venue, the iconic Metropolitan Museum of Art, would be transformed into a modern fairy tale setting. But unlike traditional tales, this one would celebrate beauty in all its forms. The decorations would include works of art commissioned especially for the event, depicting couples of all sizes, ethnicities, and orientations. The guest list was a who's who not only of high society, but also from the world of activism, the arts, and philanthropy. Celebrities who had publicly supported Juliana's cause would stand side by side with beneficiaries of Hearts Without Measure and leaders of various civil rights organizations. "By the way," Victoria continued, consulting her papers, "the last RSVPs have arrived. Guess who confirmed their attendance?" Juliana raised an eyebrow, curious. "The First Lady," Victoria announced with a triumphant smile. "Apparently, she was very touched by your work and wants to express her support in person." Juliana felt her heart leap. The magnitude of what they were accomplishing suddenly seemed even more real. Their wedding wasn't just a personal celebration. It was a platform for change on a national scale. "That's... wow," Juliana murmured, feeling momentarily speechless. Victoria laughed softly. "I know, it's a lot to process. But you deserve it, Juliana. You've worked hard for it." At that moment, another knock on the door interrupted the conversation. This time, it was Eleanor Blackwell who entered, carrying a small velvet box. "Sorry to interrupt, darlings," Eleanor said with a warm smile, "but there's something I need to deliver to Juliana before the big day." Victoria, sensing the intimate moment approaching, made a discreet exit, promising to return later for a final review of the plans. Eleanor approached Juliana, her eyes shining with restrained emotion. "Juliana, dear, what I have here is something very special, something Elizabeth always wanted to pass on to the woman her son chose to marry." With gentle hands, Eleanor opened the box, revealing a dazzling necklace of sapphires and diamonds. Juliana gasped, immediately recognizing the jewel from the photos she had seen of Elizabeth. "This necklace," Eleanor explained, her voice soft with reverence, "was a gift from Charles to Elizabeth on their wedding day. She wore it at every important moment of her life, including the day Daniel was born." Juliana felt tears forming in her eyes as Eleanor continued. "Elizabeth always said that this necklace represented not only her and Charles' love, but also the strength she found to face a world that often judged her unfairly. She wanted Daniel's future wife to wear it as a reminder that she too possessed that strength." Carefully, Eleanor removed the necklace from the box and placed it around Juliana's neck. The weight of the jewels was comforting, as if Juliana could feel Elizabeth's spirit enveloping her in a hug. "Thank you," Juliana whispered, her voice laced with emotion. "It means more than I can express." Eleanor smiled, tears shining in her own eyes. "You're the woman Elizabeth always hoped for. Daniel, Juliana, strong, compassionate, determined to make a difference. She would be as proud of you as we all are." The two women embraced, sharing a moment of deep connection that transcended generations. When Eleanor finally left, Juliana found herself alone with her thoughts again. She walked over to the mirror, admiring the necklace that now adorned her neck. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of acceptance, of belonging, of a legacy that she was now responsible for continuing. Her phone vibrated, snapping her out of her reverie. It was a message from Daniel. "I can't believe that this time tomorrow we'll be husband and wife. You've changed my life, Ju. You've changed the world. I can't wait to see what we do together in the next chapters. I love you more than words can express." Juliana smiled, feeling her heart fill with love. She was about to reply when another notification popped up, a news alert. Curious, she opened the link and felt her heart race. The article talked about how her wedding was inspiring a wave of change in the bridal fashion industry. Designers all over the world were announcing new inclusive lines, celebrating brides of all shapes and sizes. But it wasn't just the fashion industry that was being affected. The article mentioned how Juliana and Daniel's story had sparked important conversations about representation and inclusion in various sectors, from advertising to entertainment. Juliana sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the weight of the responsibility and opportunity before her. Her wedding wasn't just the beginning of her life with Daniel, it was the start of a new chapter in her mission to change the world. She picked up one of Elizabeth's diaries from the bedside table and opened it to a marked page. The words of her predecessor leapt off the page. Love has the power to transform not just two hearts, but the whole world. Use it wisely. Use it courageously. With these words echoing in her mind, Juliana closed her eyes and made a silent promise. Tomorrow, when she walked down the aisle to join Daniel, it wouldn't just be as a bride, but as a woman determined to continue her fight for a more inclusive and compassionate world. The sound of yet another notification brought her back to the present. It was a message from Sophia, her best friend and maid of honor. Hey, future Mrs. Blackwell, the girls and I are on our way. Time for the most body-positive bachelorette party in New York history. Get ready to celebrate every turn, Juliana laughed, feeling a wave of gratitude for having such incredible friends by her side. Tonight would be about celebration, about self-love, about embracing every part of herself on the eve of the most important day of her life. As she prepared for the evening of festivities, Juliana couldn't help but think about how her journey had begun, with fear, insecurity, and a world that seemed determined to make her feel less. And now, here she was, about to marry the man of her dreams, surrounded by love and support, and leading a movement for change. The road hadn't been easy, and she knew there would still be challenges ahead. But with Daniel by her side, with the support of the Blackwell family, and with the strength she had discovered within herself, Juliana felt ready to face anything. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new era, not just for her and Daniel, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized or less worthy of love. And Juliana was determined to make sure it was an era of acceptance, love, and celebration of all forms of beauty. With one last glance in the mirror, Juliana smiled at her reflection. Elizabeth's necklace glittered around her neck, a constant reminder of the legacy she now carried. Tomorrow, she would get married. But more than that, tomorrow she would take another step on her journey to transform the world, one heart at a time. "I'm ready," she whispered to herself, before heading out to meet her friends and celebrate not only her upcoming wedding, but the journey that had brought her this far, every challenge, every triumph, every turn. The New York night awaited her, vibrant and full of possibilities, just like the future she and Daniel were about to build together. The morning of the big day dawned with crystal clarity over New York. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, normally a bastion of art and history, had been transformed into a modern fairy tale setting. Flowers of all colors and sizes adorned the Great Hall, their delicate petals contrasting with the museum's imposing architecture. In the bride's room, improvised in one of the museum's most private galleries, Juliana was sitting in front of an antique mirror, surrounded by her makeup and hair team. The nervousness she had expected to feel had given way to a surprising calm, a deep certainty that this day marked not just her wedding, but the start of something much bigger. Sophia, her best friend and maid of honor, approached, holding her wedding dress carefully. "Are you ready for this, Jewel?" she asked, a broad smile on her face. Juliana nodded, standing up so that her friends could help her into the dress. The dress, a stunning creation that celebrated every curve of her body, fell smoothly over her, as if by magic. "You look absolutely stunning," Eleanor Blackwell said, entering the room at that moment. Her eyes glistened with restrained tears. "Oh, Juliana, you're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen." Juliana smiled, feeling a wave of emotion hit her. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." Eleanor moved closer, gently adjusting Elizabeth's necklace around Juliana's neck. "Remember, darling, you carry not only Daniel's love today, but the support of an entire family, an entire community that you have inspired." At that moment, a soft knock on the door announced the arrival of Victoria Hartley. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you might like to see this, Juliana," she said, handing the bride a tablet. On the screen, Juliana saw live images of the streets around the museum. Crowds were gathering, holding placards of support and celebration. "Love has no size," said one. "Juliana and Daniel, inspiring a better world," proclaimed another. "It looks like your wedding has become a kind of movement," Victoria commented, a proud smile on her face. Juliana felt tears forming in her eyes, threatening to ruin her freshly applied makeup. "I never imagined. This is incredible." "You made it happen, Juliana," Sophia said, hugging her friend carefully so as not to wrinkle her dress. "You showed the world that true love knows no bounds, that beauty comes in all sizes." One last touch of makeup, a final adjustment to the dress, and Juliana was ready. She took one last look in the mirror, barely recognizing the confident, radiant woman staring back at her. "It's time," Eleanor announced softly. Juliana's heart raced as she left the room, ready to begin her journey to the altar. The museum's corridors, normally filled with priceless works of art, were now decorated with flowers and ribbons, creating a magical path for the bride. As she approached the Great Hall, where the ceremony would take place, Juliana could hear the soft murmur of the crowd of guests. Taking a deep breath, she signaled for the doors to be opened. The music began to play, not the traditional wedding march, but a special composition that mixed classical elements with modern rhythms, symbolizing the union of the traditional with the new that her wedding represented. Juliana took the first step into the hall, and a collective sigh went through the audience. All heads turned, all eyes fixed on her. But for the first time in her life, Juliana didn't feel the weight of these gazes as a burden. On the contrary, she felt uplifted by them, carried by a wave of love and acceptance. Her gaze wandered around the hall, noticing famous faces mixed with ordinary people, all united in celebration. She saw Evelyn Blackwood, a proud smile on her normally stern face. He saw Charles Blackwell, undisguised tears running down his cheeks. And then, at the end of the corridor, she saw him. Daniel. Her Daniel. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, but it wasn't his appearance that captured Juliana's heart at that moment. It was the look in his eyes, a look of love so pure, so complete, that it seemed to light up the whole hall. Step by step, Juliana moved down the corridor. Every movement took her not only towards Daniel, but towards a future that, not so long ago, she wouldn't have dared to dream of. When she finally reached the altar, Daniel held out his hand to her. Their fingers intertwined, and in that touch, Juliana felt the whole journey that had brought them there. Every challenge, every triumph, every moment of doubt and renewed faith. The celebrant began the ceremony, his words echoing through the hall. He spoke about love, about acceptance, about the courage to be true to oneself and to others. But for Juliana and Daniel, the world seemed to have shrunk to just the two of them. When it came time for the vows, Daniel was the first to speak. "Juliana," he began, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "from the first moment I saw you, I knew my life would never be the same. You taught me the true meaning of beauty, of strength, of unconditional love. With you, I learned to see the world in a new way, more compassionately, more inclusively. I promise to spend every day of our lives together loving you, supporting you, and working alongside you to create a world where everyone can feel as loved and accepted as you make me feel." Tears flowed freely down Juliana's face as she listened to Daniel's words. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath, finding strength in the conviction of her love. "Daniel, my love, my partner, my best friend. You saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I struggled to love myself. With you by my side, I found the courage to not only accept who I am, but to celebrate every part of me. I promise to always be your safe haven, your biggest supporter, your partner in all the challenges and adventures that life brings us. Together, we will continue to spread love, acceptance, and hope, not just to each other, but to the world." The exchange of rings was a moment of deep emotion, each ring a symbol not only of their love, but of the commitment they had made to make a difference in the world. "By the power vested in me," the celebrant declared, "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may seal this union with a kiss." Daniel and Juliana moved closer, their lips meeting in a kiss that seemed to contain all the promises of their future together. The hall erupted in applause and cheers, the emotion of the moment infecting everyone present. When they finally parted, turning to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell for the first time, Juliana felt a wave of gratitude and purpose wash over her. This wasn't just the happy ending of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a new journey, one in which she and Daniel would work together to create a more inclusive, more loving, more accepting world. The reception that followed was a celebration not only of Juliana and Daniel's love, but of all forms of love and beauty. Guests of all sizes, colors, and backgrounds danced together, shared stories, created connections that transcended traditional social barriers. At a quiet moment during the party, Juliana and Daniel found themselves in a quieter corner of the hall, observing the scene before them. "Look what we've done, Ju," Daniel said softly, hugging his wife around the waist. "Look how much we've changed." Juliana nodded, resting her head on Daniel's shoulder. "And that's just the beginning," she replied. "We still have so much to do, so many lives to touch." Daniel kissed the top of her head affectionately. "And we'll do it together, one day at a time." As they watched their guests, celebrities dancing with fans, executives chatting animatedly with activists, people of all shapes and sizes feeling truly accepted and celebrated, Juliana felt a certainty solidify in her heart. Her wedding was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new and exciting adventure, an adventure of love, acceptance, and positive change. And with Daniel by her side, she knew there was no limit to what they could achieve. As the night progressed, Juliana and Daniel danced, laughed, and dreamed together. Every smile exchanged, every gentle touch, every look of love was a promise renewed. A promise not just to each other, but to the world they had committed to changing. And so, under the twinkling lights of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, surrounded by friends, family, and a community they had inspired, Juliana and Daniel Blackwell took the first steps in their new life together. A life that promised to be full of love, purpose, and the unwavering determination to create a world where everyone could feel as loved and accepted as they did in that perfect moment. Juliana and Daniel's wedding wasn't just the happy ending to a love story. It was the beginning of a movement, the first chapter in a larger narrative about acceptance, inclusion, and the transformative power of true love. And as they danced their last dance of the night, under a New York sky of stars, they both knew that the best was yet to come.